Within our Earth lies an extraordinary force. Very few are aware of the magnitude and significance of this place, where good, evil, dark, light, bliss, torment, loss, gain, and hope, despair exist as one, pulling us every moment of our lives. It is not something we can choose to navigate, but rather awareness of this presence that surrounds us with every breath, as if we are being watched at every moment. It's the place where black and white energies attach themselves to our souls and shape our emotions, choices, and perspective, and ultimately our existence. There is a miraculous and small realm within this vortex, and it's the only place where balance between these dynamic and polarizing forces exist, where the soul finds its refuge. Welcome to the Nothing. Hello everyone, and welcome to my review of The Nothing by KORN. And that snippet was an intro that Jonathan Davis used to describe the concept of The Nothing, and this is the band's first concept album. Now it's worth noting the band has attempted to do a concept album before, but plans just fell short. That was the first time was with 2002's Untouchables, and the second time was with band's 2010 album, KORN 3, Remember Who You Are. Both those were initially thought of to be concept albums in production, but were dropped partway through. Now this is the first time a KORN album has been a concept record all the way through, with that little snippet at the beginning describing the concept of this album. This is the band's 13th studio album, and it was released on September 13th, 2019. And the title of the album was taken from a villain in the Never Ending Story. And this is an album that was born from the hardships of Jonathan Davis's loss of his wife and his mother, unfortunately. Also, one other thing I will throw about this album is that it came out on Friday the 13th, so it does fit into that concept of the record even more. Sort of adds an ominous feeling to it with that release date. Just a whole lot of 13s there. This part of his life, this really rough patch for him, has affected the recording of this album, as he treated it as his own personal form of therapy. And some of his emotional breakdowns were recorded and ended up on various parts of this album, from the opening track all the way to the album closer. I went through hell last year, and I had to purge what I was going through in order to bring the listener through that experience. I don't know how to explain it, but it takes me over. When you hear me break down and cry, that's not fake. That's how I get it. Some people go to a shrink. My music is that for me. Now, 4 months were spent on vocals this time around, in which is rather than 2 weeks, which is how much he said he usually spends on a KORN album, which makes this album the most he has spent working on a KORN record vocally since Untouchables. And Untouchables was in the vocal re-recordings is part of the reason why that album took so long to come out. Untouchables does have a really awesome, really interesting production history, but I will not go into that here. That's something for a different time, possibly. Now, how does this album sound, and how does it compare to the rest of KORN's discography? Let's find out. But two things. First, I want to ask you a question. What is your favorite KORN album other than the self-titled? Also, if you follow my reviews, you know that I do a review of the album artwork before we get into the actual music side of things. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, do not worry. These parts the review of the actual art does not affect my review of the album itself. It's just more just for fun. And without being said, this is going to be really quick because the artwork was super simple. It is a person made out of wires with their hands and their legs suspended in midair, as they're like hovering over the ground with their hands sort of like that, and just like has this feeling of, it really does a really good job of being able to reflect no matter what you do, you really don't have any control over the circumstances that plague our lives for better or for worse. And we're made, and those circumstances are of what makes us who we are. It's also kind of a jarring Korn. I'm going to say jarring. It's kind of a different Korn cover because a lot of the Korn covers feature focus on this idea of loss of innocence, with often a child on the cover, usually with rather grim implications, especially if you look at the covers for especially the self-titled Life is Peachy, Take a Look in the Mirror, Korn 3, Serenity is Suffering. They all feature those themes. Very few Korn albums go out of that theme, and when they do, I'm not a fan of those particular cover arts, but this one, it does engulf the actual concept and soul of this album very well, and that's why I really do like it. I'm going to give this album cover a 10 out of 10. Simple, short, and sweet. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty, which is the album, and the opening track, And the End Begins, actually marks something that has not been seen in Korn for a very long time, and that is bagpipes. That's right, the bagpipes from the earlier Korn albums are finally back, if at all. They're pretty brief. And this also leads into Cold, which is a single for this album, and it is heavy. The guitars at the start sound like an electronic synth, and that's in a good way. I mean, it sounds like that sort of effect of a synth, because Korn was known for, especially in the 90s, for having their guitars sound like effects of like turntables and hip hop stuff from the time. It's really cool to see an updated version of that from this band, and Head is just a really phenomenal guitarist. Just his ability to create those sounds that sound that way. Another good example of how amazing a guitarist Head is, I would say, listen to. He actually has a band outside of Korn called Love and Death, and they are super underrated. There's a song called My Disaster where the guitars sound like a swarm of wasps. I'm not kidding you. It is downright impressive things this guy is able to do with guitar, and I'm going to put a link to that song in the description. And by the way, Head's also the vocalist for that band. Sorry, just the promotion of the unpaid promotion of Love and Death to the side. This is one of the heaviest Korn songs in a very long time. I did like Serenity of Suffering, but this is probably the heaviest Korn song. I want to say since Life is Peachy or Take a Look in the Mirror, around that era. But yeah, it's definitely, if you're to have a list of the top 10 like heaviest Korn songs, this would probably be in like the top 4. It is that heavy, and it just is that good. There's also a Down, 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 which could it be a throwback to Untouchables? This overall song just like kicks ass in a neat progression in the bridge, and it's just a freaking amazing opening track. That's the thing about this record also, is that there's also quite a bit of throwbacks throughout their discography, like with the next track, You'll Ever Find Me, which feels like a continued progression of sound that they had on Serenity of Suffering. as this song has a very similar chorus to the song on that album, and I love the spooky sound after the riff and the verses. The bridge has a nice simple touch with the drum cymbals before hitting the drop, and it does show how much Ray adds to the band, even if it's small, subtle details. And the theme and the sort of that feeling of throwing back to other Korn albums continues with The Darkness Revealing, which feels like a continued progression of the playground shift. And the Take a Look Around and the bridge has a feeling of a throwback to the song Evolution on Untitled, which uses that very same line for its drop. The riffs on here are just very bouncy, and the bridge just is very awesome and makes you want to punch something in a good way. Idiosyncrasy is a really interesting case here because it has one part where it has something that would be considered a criticism for me, which is a very weak lyric, pretty bad, in the line "God is making fun of me." That just comes off super angsty. But Jonathan Davis is able to pull off genuine frustration in such a statement that isn't just nu metal whining in the delivery. Sort of being able to turn something that's terrible into something that's just great. Another way I would describe this is it's like an actor who has an amazing performance despite a terrible script, and that performance single-handedly gets that movie like really good reviews, that sort of thing. The bass is really good throughout this album, I will say ahead of time, and the guitar on this track sounds like Alarm 2, just like it did on Cold, with the intro, and just really good. There is also a ballad on this album with Can You Hear Me, and it is one of the band's stronger ballads in their catalog, even though they have very few ballads. Sort of the idea I got from listening to this ballad is that it's about how when we are lost in life, no matter how we want things to be, they'll never change, even if they are for the worse. And that feeling of when we're lost astray on things, that guilt of feeling like it's too late to return to that path or self-redemption. So yeah, it's definitely more deep than what you'd expect from a nu metal ballad. And from what we've gotten from nu metal ballads, this does feel like a massive step up in the lyric writing department for Jonathan Davis on this album. And going into another song that I think is worth talking about, and that is The Ringmaster, in which from the opening riff is just a really kick-ass song. The song has a mystery sound to it in the chorus, and there's great scatting in the bridge. It picks the album back up from the ballad with a ton of energy. If I describe this album with just this song, with one image, it would be the cover art for Serenity is Suffering. It has a very carnival-like feel, which is the intention, obviously, with that kind of title. And the bridge on the song is worth being added to any playlist. It is that good, just so good. And even though the second half pretty much, I also would like to mention Gravity Discomfort does feel like a throwback to Issues, and it has some strong bass riffs, and it's one of the softer songs on the album again. Harder is one of the heavier songs on the album. Even though it's one of the weaker songs, it's still really, really good. And there's a little bit of a section right after the bridge where there's kind of a ska part with Jonathan Davis and Ray. Yeah, but even though it's I think it's 20 seconds, it's there. I never thought I'd hear Korn do a ska bit, but again, they've pretty much done a lot of things, I don't think back in the 90s people thought Korn would put out a dubstep record, but here we are. I think at this point Korn will pretty much do anything. Okay, that's not an insult, by the way. I feel bands are allowed to explore any sort of avenue they want, and yeah, I will say, even though the second half of the album is not as high of a ceiling as the first half, the second half does have a lot of really awesome moments in it too, especially the closer, Surrender the Failure, which is a very bleak outro to close this record on a very bleak concept and brings everything full circle. There's not a single song on here that's like, okay, or outright bad. In fact, I can see some of these songs, especially in the second half, growing on me over time. This is not a terrible record, and it is not just good, and it's not just good for new Korn. This is a great album, period. I'll go so far as to say as it's a top 3 Korn album. Yes, you heard that right. Top 3. I'm not sure how this will compare to the self-titled album and such, as I've not listened to that in a while, and I want to avoid the bias of recency in the album, like in a new album, just because it's newer and sort of the high that you get with any new album before it all settles down. But this is honestly a really phenomenal record, and I had pretty high expectations coming into this album, and this album delivered on that and more. Jonathan Davis really stepped it up this time, especially with how much effort he put into this album, and Fieldy has given his best bass performance on this album since Take a Look in the Mirror. Just the bass on this thing is just freaking phenomenal. And then the guitars between Head and Monkey just complement each other so well, which is something that is iconic to the Korn sound. You're getting some of that and some new things, like with the mimicking of more modern electronica with the guitars. You have that really cool dynamic between the two, and you just have the band just going off in all cylinders, especially Ray, who was an amazing addition to the band. Just the amount of fills and things he's able to add to the Korn sound is for the better. And the comeback for Korn continues, as this is their third solid release in a row, and it is a really freaking amazing album. And yes, I know Korn didn't go on a hiatus, but let's be real. They did have a significant drop after Head left, and now everything's picking up, and it is glorious. I'm looking forward to especially seeing some of these songs being performed live. So right after this review, I'm probably going to look up clips of these songs live. As for my overall rating on this album, I'm going to give The Nothing by Korn a 9.5 out of 10, giving it a tier of masterpiece. My favorite songs on this album were Cold, You'll Never Find Me, Idiosyncrasy, The Ringmaster, and The Darkness is Revealing. What were your thoughts on this album, and what was your favorite and least favorite album on this track, and how did you feel about the overall concept of the album? Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, I'll chat to you in the comment section on YouTube, and I'll see you in the next review. And with that being said, have a great day. Peace.